You are listening to the Overthinker's Guide to Joy, episode 65. This is the one where I interview expert marriage coach Maggie Reyes on how to have a 5-star marriage. Let's dive in. This is a podcast for overthinkers, overdoers, and overachievers who are tired of feeling overanxious and just want to feel better. I'm your host, certified life coach, Jackie DeCrenis. So today I am super excited to have on my podcast Maggie Reyes, who is not only a friend and colleague, but is a master certified life coach and modern marriage mentor. She specializes in helping driven, ambitious people create their best marriages without waiting for their partners to change or adding more work to their lives. She is the creator of the Marriage MBA program, a 6-month mentorship in creating a successful marriage using principles from both positive psychology, cognitive science, and simple coaching tools that you can learn today and apply tomorrow. Maggie is the author of the best-selling book, Questions for Couples Journal, which has over 3,000 4-star ratings on Amazon. And she is also the host of the Marriage Life Coach podcast, which is consistently ranked among the top 2% of podcasts out of over 2 million podcasts tracked by Listen Notes. When she isn't coaching, she loves obsessing over Bridgerton, reading fan fiction, sexy romance novels, and watching superhero movies and Mexican rom-coms with her hubby. So with that, I want to welcome my friend Maggie Reyes.
I'm so excited to be here. I cannot wait to dive into everything we're talking about. And thank you for having me and for just being amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, I love talking about this subject. And this is not something I coach on a lot. I sort of stay out of this lane because it is such a wonderful niche. And I don't stay out for you because it's your lane, but you are such a master in this world. And I know from all of our mutual friends and clients how extraordinary your work is as a marriage coach. But what is unique about you, which is different than other coaches I've known or therapists I've known in this arena, is you coach individuals on making their marriage better.
Yes.
And what a lot of people who have a barrier to entry is, I would like to go to marriage counseling or therapy or coaching, but my spouse, my partner, won't do it or isn't open or doesn't think there's something wrong with our marriage. And that leaves an individual really stuck because if their partner doesn't want coaching or therapy or counseling, then a person could feel very alone in whatever they're struggling with in their coupledom. And you offer this beautiful pathway to say, hey, you're not alone and your marriage isn't over. I can help you work on cleaning up your side of the street. So I'd love with that just to jump in on how do you do that? How do you coach somebody on a relationship that requires 2 people? How do you coach them so that they can fix it on their end?
You know, it's not that different than when you do leadership development coaching and you're coaching someone that has a team and you don't have the whole team in front of you. Just for everyone listening, you look at your role in the relationship, your role as a leader in the relationship, what you want to create, and what parts of that are in your power. And one of the things they say a lot is not that you do all the work, it's that you go first. And so if you think about any relationship, whether in my case, obviously I coach on marriage all the time, but if you're thinking about anyone that you want to have a more thriving connection with, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend, family member, how do you do that? You start with the parts that are in your control. You do those things first, and then they react to those things. And very often subtle changes starts happening where more collaboration starts occurring.
That's amazing. So is it an energetic shift or is it also practical tools?
I think it's both. I think the energetic shift is to decide that you want to pour love where you might have been pouring some resentment in before, right? That's an energy. Like if everything my partner does is annoying, how am I showing up? What energy am I putting out? It's like I'm persistently annoyed. That is not fun. So there's that energetic component of like, well, what are the reasons I'm with this person? Why do I value them? Why does this still matter to me? Can I find any love or grace or forgiveness? Whatever I find that opens a door for me to relate to them a little bit differently. So that's the energetic part. And then the practical part is literally things that you do in your day. Are you expressing appreciation? Are you making requests instead of complaining about things. It's like, oh, we never go on vacation anymore. We never go out to dinner, let's say, right? Some simple things. Instead of saying we never go out to dinner, if I say that, does that produce me going out to dinner? No. If I say, hey, I noticed we haven't gone out in a month. Let's go out. Where do you want to go? Right? It's starting to make requests that then propel you to a different experience.
Super interesting. You have an analogy that you talk about 4-star.
The 5-star marriage. Yes.
Excuse me. 5-star marriage.
Yeah.
Talk to us. Walk me through that a little bit.
Okay. That's so much fun. Okay. So here's a little background. I used to work in human resources and I worked for a cruise line for many years. And after I worked with them, I worked in the ultra luxury segment of hospitality at something called The World. Everyone should look it up. It's a yacht that has residences on it. And it's like a Four Seasons or a Ritz-Carlton at sea. And so I learned a lot about 5-star hospitality, 5-star service. And then when I became a coach, I thought about some people are living in motel marriages right now. It's like a 1-star situation. There's scratchy sheets, there's cold showers. It's like the basics. And wouldn't it be amazing if we thought about what living in a 5-star marriage could be? What would that look like? And I started really looking analytically at hospitality and how your experience is engineered. So when you walk into your favorite hotel and they're like, welcome back, right? And they maybe have your favorite candy bar for turn down service, or they have your favorite drink at the bar, those kinds of things. It's like they write down your preferences, they put you in a database, they learn what you like. And so many of those things are engineered. It's like, well, we can engineer that at home as well. And so that was how I started thinking about what is a 5-star marriage. It's a 5-star marriage is like a place where your home feels like your sanctuary and where there are many pieces of that that can be engineered. Expressing appreciation, just like a hotel does for its guests. I call it your love database, which is knowing your partner's interior world. So research tells us that couples who thrive know what's happening for the other person. And this is just like a hotel. When they write down your preferences, they know what you like and what you don't like. So right now, as you think about, for everyone listening, if you think about your partner, do you know what they're worried about right now? Do you know what they're excited about right now? Have you already made some dreams come true? Are there new dreams you haven't made come true yet? What are they? If you know them and you're like solid and that you know them, that's awesome. That is very much a contributor to thriving, to closeness and connection. If you don't, this is the perfect opportunity tonight or this week to have a conversation. What are you worried about right now? What are you excited about? What's a dream you haven't made come true yet? So that's how that came to be, the 5-star marriage.
I love that so much. It's a beautiful metaphor and it's a beautiful set of guideposts for how to conduct something you value, which obviously your relationship and your home and your significant other.
Yes.
How do you avoid, or how does a client avoid when they start thinking in terms of like, what excites my partner, or what are their dreams, or what cocktail do they like, or how do they like their tacos, or whatever?
Yeah. So fun.
And women, I believe, are more inherently geared towards that anyway, just whether you're a mother or a wife, or we tend to be a little bit more detail oriented about like, my husband doesn't like milk in his coffee, he likes cream or whatever. When you're putting out that energy to your partner, if you're in a traditional male-female relationship, I'm using that example, and they aren't returning that, do you ever find that clients are like, well, I'm really stepping into what their dreams are and what their needs are, and remembering their favorite cocktail and remembering their favorite bedtime or show to watch or whatever. If they're not getting it back, what happens?
I think you have to test it. I really think there's no way to know until you test it for a while and you see how it starts evolving. So an example that I love to give actually happened before I was ever even a coach. It was just me and my best friend talking. And she was very frustrated with her husband at the time. And I have her permission to share this story, so in case anybody's wondering. So she was very frustrated with her husband at the time. And I said, well, when was the last time you thanked him for something? And she said, well, why should I thank him for things he's supposed to do in the first place? Typical answer. And I said, I don't know, but you're frustrated and unhappy. And I'm delighted with my husband. So maybe try it. Right? So it was one of those where she's like, oh, whatever. Okay, fine. Right? When you're talking with your best friend. So she started just thanking him for little things, little things. Thank you for taking out the trash, which in her mind, he was supposed to do anyway. But she's like, thank you for doing it. Thank you for bringing me, this plate, little tiny, tiny things. And 2 weeks later, 2 or 3 weeks later, she called me. She's like, oh, you're never going to believe what happened. But I get that all the time. So I always believe what happened. She said, he stopped at Starbucks and bought me my favorite coffee on the way home from work. And he hasn't done that in 5 years. And
Wow.
I'm like, wait, what? Tell me. I was like, hold on. Now I was like, tell me more.
Wow.
She's like, well, I did that thing where I started thanking him like he told me. And then he started thanking me for things. And now we're like so much nicer to each other. And he thought I might like it if he stopped at Starbucks. And it was literally from the tiniest, tiniest thing and doing it repeatedly and then seeing how it went. That's really the approach. So if someone is trying something like this simple, which is to just express gratitude on a daily basis, it's a very good idea. Everyone should do it. And you say, okay, I'm on day 30 and my partner has shown me no appreciation whatsoever, has not shifted in any way. There's no tenderness. There's no kindness here. Then my thought about that is that's data you want to have. And I always think most of you listening are not married to jerks. You're just married to good people having bad days. But a small percentage of you are married to jerks. And this is how we find out.
That's so good. So it's one of my favorite feelings that I recommend to people, which, obviously I'm sort of a stress and anxiety coach. So I'm always trying to give people tools how to manage their stress and anxiety because most of my clients are high functioning professionals with busy lives and they're stressed out by them.
Of course.
And one of the things I talk about all the time and other coaches do as well is the notion of curiosity, reducing stress and anxiety. And that's a good example of that, which is being a data collector, not an investigative journalist, right? Not looking for evidence to prove that they're bad people, but just staying curious. Like, I'm going to try this experiment and staying on the side of hopeful that either I'll feel better or he'll feel better or she'll feel better or will feel better.
Yeah.
And I like that curiosity is such a buoyant emotion.
Yes.
And so it sounds like when you're collecting data, it's again, not looking for evidence to put them on trial as why they're a bad partner.
Right.
But if I do this, maybe there will be something good out of it. And if not, I'll just stay curious and observe it neutrally.
I love curiosity. It's also one of my favorites. And I take it even one step further. You do this not for your partner's reaction, but for who you want to be in the world.
I love that.
You do this because you want to be loving or kind or generous or forgiving or however you want to be. And then the data you collect is who do they want to be in the world? How do they react in the face of your kindness? Do they react with appreciation? Do they react with annoyance or anger? And I have had clients where the person's, really cleaned up their side of the table, approached it with kindness, with generosity, with forgiveness. And the person, for whatever reason, was not able to receive that or reciprocate. And I always land on that's data you want to have. Now you get to decide from the cleanest place possible. Do I want a relationship where it looks like this? What is it that I want? What would satisfy me? And sometimes it's not tit for tat. It's not a perfect exchange of kindnesses, right? Sometimes I express my kindness one way and you express it another way. But the way you express it is fine for me. It doesn't have to be the same as me. I just enjoy the way you do it, right?
Right.
That's part of that being in curiosity and seeing what does satisfy me.
Do you talk about love language? I mean, I know there's a famous book on it, but do you talk about the love languages in your coaching?
I don't, unless a client brings it up, but I do want to talk about it now because I have cautionary tales for everybody to listen to.
Okay. I'd love to hear.
So here's the thing. The 5 Love Languages currently is the most sold relationship book on the entire planet. Millions and millions and millions.
Yes.
And it has a usefulness. It has a place. What I have seen a lot in my coaching practice. So remember, people that come to me are struggling for some reason in their relationship. So when people are struggling, something that happens a lot amongst people who are struggling is they find out their love language or their partners,
Mm-hmm.
and then they realize they're not good at speaking it or they're not good at executing it. And
Mm-hmm.
then they create a death sentence for themselves in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the cautionary tale that I want everyone to know, that the love languages are a tool for awareness. I love receiving compliments. Great to know. That doesn't mean that if your partner is bad at compliments, you have to drop them like a hot potato.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you do? How does that work? How can it be possible? What if we have opposite love languages? What if I'm just terrible? Gifts is one of the love languages. What if I'm terrible at picking out gifts and that's what my
Yeah.
partner wants? What
Yeah.
the heck do we do with that? So, what I tell people is do not ignore the ways they are showing you affection
Uh-huh.
just because you have a preferred way of receiving
Uh-huh.
affection.
Uh-huh.
And I use myself as my own lab example because
Yeah.
I do love words of affirmation.
I do too.
And my husband loves doing acts of service. So my husband
Uh-huh.
will go to the grocery store so I can record a podcast. He will, stop and buy milk on the way home, even if it's out of his way to do it so that we have milk for the next day. He will do things that make my life easier in so many ways, but it will never occur to him to like walk into my office and say, "You look stunningly beautiful today, and you're also brilliant, and I'm so proud of you." Like, this is not a spontaneous thing that's ever going to just happen. But I do not feel like I'm missing anything in my relationship,
Uh-huh.
even though that's not my love language. Every time he does something kind or generous for me,
Uh-huh.
now it's a joke we have, but now I say, I receive that like a sonnet. We have a good laugh. And then he'll do something else. I'm like, oh, that's a double album of my favorite artist. That's like 20 songs right there, songs of love right there. And so every time he's doing something, I receive it. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't experience that as if anything is missing.
I
I'm
love
not,
that.
I'm not settling. I'm not
Right.
upset about it.
Right.
I genuinely feel filled up.
Because you recognize that his love language, and I think there's also a differentiation. There's the love language of how you show love and how you like to receive it. And it's not necessarily the same thing.
Correct.
Right. So there's one about tacos and coffee. Like,
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah.
it's
There's
really
something.
funny. And I don't have it at my fingertips, but it's
Yeah.
something like, I like to be held like a warm cup of coffee. I like to be served my cup of coffee, something like
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
But so we don't always show our love language in the way we like to receive it and vice versa. So it's not a linear thing. But
Yeah.
he clearly has a love language, which is these acts of service. So he is showing you in the ways, at least that he likes to show you, and you choose to receive it. So
Yes.
you get filled up by the fact that that's his love language of at least giving,
Yes.
which is really beautiful.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful. So talk to me a little bit about how often, because there's a word that's been bouncing around a lot in psychology and in coaching,
Mm-hmm.
probably more than I've ever heard in the last 2 years,
Mm.
which is this notion of narcissism.
Ooh, okay.
And I know it's a loaded word, so I'm not asking you
Yeah.
to dissect it from a psychological standpoint. That's not our
Mm-hmm.
jobs.
Yep.
But I would love to know, because I see it a lot in the few clients that I've had where their marriage is an issue that they come to coaching for as
Yep.
part of their other issues. And a lot of people will talk about narcissism. I'm married to a narcissist, or I
Mm-hmm.
think my husband might be a narcissist, or my ex-husband is a narcissist, or wife, or whatever. How do you deal with that when maybe there's a clear diagnosis? Maybe there isn't. Maybe it's opinion. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's hyperbole. Maybe it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And they're starting to strive for this 5-star marriage. They're showing up. They're identifying their own love language and how their partners perceive love, give love. And maybe there is an element of or accusation of narcissism. How do you deal with that when you're only dealing with one side of the couple?
I actually dealt with that today. So it's a very fresh in my mind,
Oh, I
actually.
love it.
Yeah. Here's how I look at anything like that, whether it's narcissism, depression, anxiety, all these different things that make us human. We all have these different things. And the fundamental question that I ask is, what is the best marriage you can have with this person? And do you want that? And that fundamental question applies no matter whether there's a diagnosis or not, whatever the experience is or not. It's just, how do I clean up my side of the table, go first, decide the type of relationship I want to have, see how this person responds, and then depending on what is their ability or capability to respond, right? So let's use this narcissism example. Think there's a difference, which we don't have to get into the detail right now, but just for everyone listening, there's a difference between like a clinically diagnosed narcissistic person, which is a percentage of society that is relatively small compared to everyone that's telling you that they have a narcissist in their life.
Exactly.
But we all have some elements of self-centeredness that are more developed or less developed. And so unless it's a clinical diagnosis, some of those elements of self-centeredness that would also overlap with some of the behaviors of narcissism, some of those, I think the difference when it's clinical versus not clinical is they can be changed. They can evolve. They can be slightly adjusted with behavior modification and things like that. So it just depends. Like my answer used to be the same in HR. People would ask me these, complex questions. I'm like, it depends on a case by case basis. One person might be married to a narcissist, and the perfect answer for her is to get a divorce. And another person might be married to a narcissist, and the perfect answer for him is to stay together and just have really clear boundaries about what's okay and not okay in different situations. And nobody's right or wrong in that scenario. So, what I would say to someone who's having a situation like that, where someone told them or they think it might be or whatever, is to go back to the fundamental question. Have I arrived at the best version of my relationship yet? Yes or no? What would it take to do that? Whether it's listening to this podcast, working with you, doing a marriage program, what would it take to get my marriage to the place where I could say, I think this is the best version of it? And then I could ask myself, okay, we've gotten to the place where we've worked through a bunch of things. This is really the best version. Do I want that?
That makes sense. So again, not throwing out terms unless there's a clinical diagnosis. Yeah. And even if there is a clinical diagnosis, doesn't mean throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Correct.
And every case is individual. And so it's case by case basis.
And I want to say this because another thing I see come up a lot is this happens sometimes if there's a diagnosis of some kind, sometimes with a breach of trust, like infidelity.
That was my next subject.
We can talk about that in depth after this, but I want to say this to someone listening to us right now needs to hear this, and I want you to hear this from me. There is no shame in loving another human. There is no shame in forgiving something that society tells you is unforgivable. What I see more often than not is that our society encourages you to be in only situations where you feel fully empowered and feel good, and which I'm 100% for. I'm literally a feminist coach. I'm all about empowering women to have the lives they want. But what I coach on a lot is the shame of saying, well, this happened, but I want to forgive this person, or this happened and I want to stay with this person. And the judgment of the person thinking that they somehow shouldn't make that choice. So it's like, if you're physically safe, if you are not in imminent danger, and the person has done something that has deeply hurt you, that could even be something traumatic that you would take therapy or counseling, and you want to work through it, it's okay to want that. I just want to be a person on earth that says that it's okay to want that. And it's also okay to not want that if you come to the conclusion later that it's something you want to change. That's what I wanted to say about that part.
So this is, again, I'm giving you no softballs here. I'm giving you like major fastballs, curveballs. Sorry if it's just too huge for this few minutes that we're getting together. But I want to talk about infidelity. I want to talk about it in the context that somebody comes to your program, their partner has been unfaithful. It's different if they've been unfaithful, because then again, they're cleaning up their side of the street. They're taking ownership. They're just like, I want to overcome this. That's different. But when somebody's been unfaithful, that's something beyond your control. You can't control what people do. The partner either, maybe has remorse, maybe doesn't. Maybe it's continuing, maybe it isn't, what have you. Where do you begin with somebody who has had betrayal in their life and is still in their relationship, still wants it to work, but has so many feelings of inadequacy, betrayal, hurt, fear? jealousy, paranoia, all the things that come with anytime you're betrayed, whether it's romantically or otherwise. Where do you start with that individual?
I think we start at wherever feels accessible to that person. And for each person, that's going to be different. Sometimes there's so much heightened emotion that it feels too big to tackle some of the things that do need to be tackled at some point. I'm a big fan of doing the simplest thing first, the place where you could start first. Very often, they need to work on obviously trusting their partner again, creating connection and cultivating the friendship again. But they also need to work on trusting themselves again, because there's a lot of shame of how did I not see the signs? How did I not figure it out? I thought everything was fine. So very often we refocus on trusting yourself, that even if they were to breach the trust again, you can handle it. How do we know you can handle it? Because you have resilience, because you have persistence. So there's always an element of self-trust that we work on cultivating and harnessing and making bigger and stronger. And then whatever the simplest path forward is, very often something that comes up is, what can I ask for? Or if I need to be comforted, just permission to ask for whatever you need to ask for. So some people want to have your passwords. Some people want to be able to see your phone. Some people want to cultivate that trust, right? To recreate that trust. They have things that they find comforting. And for everybody, it's a little bit different what they find comforting. And my role, I think, as their coach is to say permission to want what you want. Just
I love that.
Whatever that looks like.
I love that. And if the partner doesn't want to give that, then that's data.
Data you want to have. It's like, why don't they want to give it? What is the issue? What's going on? And there are people who land on different parts of the spectrum of what is privacy and what should we share and what should we not share, and have their own, even if they're completely innocent at this point and they're not really, they do want to rebuild the relationship, but they have other family history or cultural narratives around what they feel safe to share. Then you just want to unpack that and see where you land and where can you meet in the middle and what can you do together. So it's nuanced, I would say. There is no clear cut. Every single person should do X, Y, or Z. The only thing that I'm always saying, everything is up to you. Everything is what works for you. But the one thing we know is, if you cannot cultivate a friendship with your partner, you're never going to get to thriving. So if I think about thriving, like the 5-star marriage, right? If you're in a motel situation where you're arguing every day or you're disconnected completely, don't even speak to each other anymore, can we get you to like a 3-star with a hot breakfast, which is going to be at least better than where you were before? Yes, we can. But if there's no intention or desire to think of that person, I call it your sexy bestie, to have sexy bestie energy with that person, we know that you're not going to get to thriving. But some people, they're very happy with a hot breakfast. I love those hotels, right?
Right.
Right. And for many reasons, that when I say, what's the best marriage you could have with this person, and is this what you want? They're like, oh, if I could go from that 1 to that 3, I'm golden. I don't even forget about that other stuff. I don't even need that. Right. So I also want to be a voice in the world that says that it's not all rainbows and sunshine and whatever. It's what works for you.
Well, and I love that reminder, because that's something I coach on for anxiety and stress, which is, it's not black or white. There really is, no pun intended, but there really is 50 shades of gray. And that's not settling. That's
correct.
That's just thinking different. Like, things have to be perfect. And I think for a lot of people who are overachievers, high functioning, doers in the world, perfection I talk about it a lot on this podcast. Perfection gets in the way in a lot of different forms. It's not all just work driven. There's perfection in my relationships, and perfection in, the way things look, and control. And I think letting go of what is perfect and connecting to what works for the individual is really a very empowering notion and liberating.
100%. My husband, who's an engineer, very often says, and it's a quote, it's a famous quote. I don't know who said it originally, but my husband says it to me on a regular basis, is that the perfect is the enemy of the possible.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, but what is possible here? What can we do here? And focusing on that instead of focusing on what some fictitious version of perfect. Nobody's relationship is perfect, right? That does not exist.
Right.
One thing I want to add just on the breaches of trust, because there's I once coached someone who her husband had a whole business from her. So it was like a financial breach of trust, but it was completely like a whole part of his life that she knew nothing about. So this can come in all kinds of shapes and forms and things. I love continuing education, as Jackie knows about me. So we talk about that behind the scenes. And I did a training with Esther Perel, who's a very renowned relationship psychologist. And
I adore her. I
I
adore listening to her.
love her work. So she did a training on helping her clients overcome infidelity. And one of the most impactful things that she said that really has influenced how I think about this and coach on it and just my worldview on it is, in our culture, we take infidelity and make that the reason a relationship works or doesn't work. We take one data point. It's like taking one data point.
Yeah.
And then she said, but really, our relationships are more like an ecosystem.
Yeah.
And there's the house you live in, where your kids go to school, your group of friends, the different social circles that you're in as a result of being in your relationship. There's all of these other data points.
Yeah.
And she said, don't make decisions based on one data point. She said it differently, but that was the gist of what she was saying.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, maybe we need to work through some pieces around this particular thing. And this is why I say there's no shame if you want to stay in your relationship, because I've coached people where they're like, I want my kid to graduate this high school. I'm not going to shake up my entire life for, the next 2 years because I want, my kid is thriving right now.
Yeah.
There's no shame in that. You get to want what you want, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
That's the part I want to say.
So there's so many different elements to a long-term marriage or even a short-term relationship. And it's got so many stages, and whether you have kids or animals, whether you have wealth or not, whether you run a business together or don't, whether you have religious differences, family background differences, all the things. There's so many components. It's interesting. I imagine coaching people on marriage, because you're coaching individuals on marriage. It is very much like your HR background, where people come in with numerous issues, complaints, fears, concerns, frustrations, and you're really troubleshooting from so many different angles, psychologically and societally, and even from familial patterns. And expectations and things like that. So there is no linear roadmap to just do this and it's a perfect marriage. Just do this, it's a perfect relationship.
There is no perfect. And one of the things I say is nothing in your life has to be perfect to be awesome. Like, we can get it to awesome while being wildly imperfect, right?
Yeah.
And there are certain pillars of things. Cultivating friendship is one of them. Communicating clearly is another. Questioning your thoughts and mindsets about how you're approaching situations is another. There are certain things that will help you make it more likely that your relationship will thrive. So there are certain things, and we know one of the things I love to quote is the Gottman Institute. They've done research over 40 years of people who are thriving in their relationships, people who are not thriving, and then they create interventions based on this research that they've done. So we do know the cultivating of friendship, very important. We do know knowing each other's interior world, which is part of that, absolutely makes it infinitely more likely. You're like stacking fate in your favor, right? By doing some of these things. But is there one linear path to these things? It's going to look different for everybody.
So if you were to, as we kind of wind down this huge, we went from such macro subjects to, I would love for the audience to just have like a couple little key takeaways before they leave today. If you were to give some very basic principle advice to somebody who's struggling in a relationship, that there's either an inequity of responsibilities or an inequity of appreciation, or maybe there's been infidelity, any of those things that create an imbalance of power in the relationship. And you talked about, which I love, you have to work on your own empowerment first. Yes, you have to show gratitude, connection, communication, friendship, appreciation. Those are all incredibly valuable. But talk about the self-care piece. Talk about the piece that starts with just the individual and how someone would go to repair their own sense of self when they have felt either hurt or betrayed or disconnected, not even hurt, but just disconnected from their partner? What would be your starting points? Because, by the way, I love when you said, I like things that are easy. I always say, take the easy steps first. I have taken that advice so many times from you in all the years we've known each other and the times we've gotten on the phone and talked about problem solving, just in our businesses or whatever. And you're always like, what's the easiest thing? Do the easiest thing. And that advice resonates with me so deeply. And I share that advice with my clients all the time. So what would be the easy steps for somebody who's starting from a little bit of ground zero again in trying to rebuild a relationship?
You could take this in so many directions. Like, so I'm just going to name what came to mind for me in this moment, but I want everybody to know this is not the only thing you can do. This is just one thing you can do.
Love it.
And here's where I would start is I would just check in and how are you feeling right now? Have you eaten? Have you slept? Have you rested? I'm sure these are things you talk about all the time, dealing with anxiety.
Yeah.
I talk a lot in my work about stress cycle awareness. And by stress cycle, I mean fight, flight, freeze, appease. Like right now, as you're listening to this podcast, you are probably relaxed listening to us because we're delightful. But if you think about when you finish listening to us and you go back to work or you go back home, are you in a fight response? Do you feel heightened? Are you in a freeze response? Do you feel like you want to shut down and get under the covers? Just having awareness of where you are will help you then see, of course, I'm exhausted. I haven't slept in 3 nights because I've been crying over the thing that just happened or whatever. And giving yourself grace for whatever state you might be in once you ask yourself that question. I think there's this disconnect. I think we live in this microwave society where you put something in the microwave and 90 seconds later it's done. And that's only applies to microwaves. It does not apply to humans, right? And we also don't work 24/7. We have to rest and recharge and then go. And I think there's this disconnect, like, okay, when I feel like crap, my job is to not do anything. My job is to go take a nap.
Yeah.
Here's what happens a lot. A lot of the work that I do in coaching isn't linear. It isn't, and then you're going to feel better. No, you're going to go take a nap and then you'll be able to process thoughts. And then you'll be able to see what question you need to ask yourself. And then you can ask it and then you can see the answer. And 5 steps later, you will feel better. But there's no use in trying to figure that out now if what you need is a nap or a meal or to go hug a friend or look at the ocean or hug a tree or whatever that is. So the shortened version of that is self-soothe first, comfort and kindness first, and then go face whatever dragon you need to slay.
I love that. And it's great advice for anything, right? Whether you're having a difficult relationship, whether you're having difficulty at work, whether you're not feeling well, whether you've been given bad news or your family's overwhelming, self-soothe in hopefully a healthy, productive way, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Self-soothe doesn't mean like indulge in the worst habits ever. Like self-soothe is literally, can I come back to calm, centered, groundedness?
Right.
What would help me do that? So one piece of cake is fine. The whole cake, maybe
not fine.
Not fine. Right. So literally self-soothe is how can I come back? You know, if we think of a little baby crying, right? How do we hold and love and comfort that baby so that they can come back to just grounded center?
Well, it's an interesting thing because having a baby, there is a checklist for what you do when a baby's crying, which is you check their diaper to see if it's dirty.
Yeah.
You look at the clock or you see if they're hungry.
Yeah.
Or you calm them down, or they're either hot or cold, and then you calm them down because they might need a nap. Like those are the checklists. And then after you're done with like basic care, then you have to figure out what's wrong. Like if
this is it. So good. Basic care. Then we figure out what's wrong. And so many of us skip the basic care part.
Right. We don't check the diaper and get them something to eat and give them a nap. Right. Which is what we need to do for ourselves. Yeah. Metaphorically. That's so helpful. So self-soothing in a constructive way, giving yourself grace and pause. I have that on another podcast with another coach who talks about self-compassion being a big component of where to start when you're having a rough time.
Agreed.
Yeah. This has been so amazing. And I am sure that my listeners are going to be like, oh my God, I want to talk to Maggie. So, how do people get in touch with you? And what do you have to offer people who may be struggling in their relationships, not even marriage, but just relationships?
Well, one thing I hear a lot is you work with me on your relationship, and then all of your other relationships get better. Like that's a refrain that's just very, very common. So the best thing to do is my website is maggiereyes.com. So it's MAGGIEREYES.com. You can go there. You can get on my email list. You can see whatever I'm up to whenever you hear this. I always think about like, we're recording it now, but 5 years from now, someone will
Right.
hear this. So you could absolutely go there. I like Instagram. I'm the Maggie Reyes on Instagram. You can find me there. I also host a podcast. It's called the Marriage Life Coach Podcast. And I, like you, like to cover deep, like today, there are no, was it softballs today?
Yeah.
I like to cover deep topics in depth in a very simple and approachable way, just like we did today. So if you're going through something right now and you want some comfort and support in your ear as you figure it out, my podcast is free. I love for people to use it, listen to it. I always say, listen with intent to apply.
I love that. I love that. And I've listened to dozens of your episodes, and they are just chock full of amazing golden nuggets for relationship advice and just how to be a better human. Because everybody in our classes that we've taken together always refers to Maggie as sunshine. She is just a ray of sunshine, which is interesting because her last name is Reyes. But she is a ray of sunshine, and she brings that sunshine to everything she does, both in her teaching, in her coaching, and her friendship. And I love having you as my friend and colleague in this business. And I thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
It was a pleasure and an honor. And bye, everyone. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you again, Maggie. And I adore you. And I will see you soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Overthinker's Guide to Joy. If you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe or follow this podcast so you can always be in the know when the next episode drops. If you would like to learn more about working with me as a coach, you can connect with me through my website at jackiedegrenis.com. That's JACKIEDECRINIS.com.